A list of shame. Israel added to a blacklist of countries harming children in wars. Lashing out at the UN in response, it says Israel's army is the most moral in the world. So how does that stand up, given the thousands of children it's killed in its ongoing war on Gaza? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. The United Nations is set to announce the addition of Israel to its blacklist of countries and groups who have violated the rights of children during armed conflict. Whether any action will be taken will be up to the UN Security Council. Some say, at the very least, it could put more diplomatic pressure on Israel. But would that be enough to bring about real change? We'll put this to our guests in just a moment. First, this report from Imogen Kimber.
15,000 children dead, at least 12,000 injured and around 3,000 with limbs amputated. 30 children are reported to have died from starvation and 1.1 million are at risk of malnutrition. All in Gaza, since Israel began its war in October 2023. In an annual report, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has now added Israel to a global blacklist of countries that have harmed and abused children during armed conflicts. The decision angered Israel.
I am utterly shocked and disgusted by this shameful decision of the Secretary General. Courtney, you know that Israel's army is the most moral army in the world. So this immoral decision will only aid the terrorists and reward Hamas. The only one who is blacklisted today is the Secretary General, whose decisions since the war started and even before are rewarding terrorists and incentivizing them to use children for terror acts.
But Israel has also angered the UN. A spokesman said he was shocked that Ambassador Erdan had leaked parts of a recording he made of a courtesy phone call by the UN to inform Israel of the decision ahead of the release of the report.
Ambassador Erdan's video recording of that phone call and the partial release of that recording on Twitter is shocking and unacceptable, and frankly something I've never seen in my 24 years serving this organization.
Palestine's ambassador to the UN has welcomed Israel's addition to the blacklist. In UN Secretary Antonio Guterres' annual report to the Security Council, it refers to the killing, maiming, denial of aid access and targeting of schools and hospitals. But, as the report has not been made public, the exact accusations Israel faces are not clear. The list is known as the List of Shame. ISIL, Boko Haram, Russia and Afghanistan have all been named. But this is the first time for Israel, although it was previously mentioned in the report for carrying out grave rights violations against children. The Security Council has responsibility for deciding what action to take once a country is included on the list. But Israel is already likely to face further reputational and diplomatic damage. In the International Court of Justice, it's already accused of genocide in Gaza and using starvation as a weapon of war. And prosecutors at the International Criminal Court are seeking warrants for the arrest of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defence Minister Yoav Gallant over alleged war crimes. The head of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, describes Israel's war on Gaza as a war on children, their childhood and their future. Yet, it continues in full force. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guests now. And from Pemba in Mozambique, Damien Lilly, former head of the Protection Division at UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Arwa Damon is the founder of INARA, that's the International Network for Aid, Relief and Assistance. She was in Gaza in April, but joins us today from Istanbul. And Gideon Levy is an author and columnist at the Israeli daily paper Haaretz and joins us from London. Great to have you all on the programme today. Arwa, this war has been called a war on children, a war against children. What is your reaction to Israel being added to this blacklist of countries that harms children?
Well, in the context of this very much being called a war on children, and right from the get-go, it must be said, it is not entirely surprising, although highly unlikely to make any sort of a difference. And when we talk about this being a war on children, we are talking about it not just in terms of the physical sense, in terms of the sheer number and scale and volume of children who are being killed and injured, but also in the sense that every single pillar of stability that exists in a child's life has been completely and entirely eradicated. To steal away a child's capacity to be able to even remotely feel safe is deeply traumatic. And then to have these constant daily triggers and traumas that are just reoccurring, compounding pain, compounding fear, compounding hunger, compounding even the most basic thing like the ability to, go to the bathroom or be able to, turn around and know that your parent is going to be there to be able to reassure you. I don't really think that we have a full ability to understand just how deeply devastating this is on a child's psyche.
Well, we will revisit the impact of this war on children inside Gaza a little later in the discussion. First of all, Gideon, I want to get an idea of how Israelis have reacted to this decision, this leaked decision by the UN, the Israeli ambassador to the UN.
Israelis like Israelis, accusing the entire world and not looking upon themselves, not taking any accountability. This society, unfortunately, lives in such a denial and brainwash that nothing can penetrate it. And immediately you hear the attacks on the world, not only by the ambassador or the prime minister who claim that Israel has the most moral army in the world. I can't think about a sadder joke than this in those days, especially. But it's not only about them, it's about the general feeling in Israeli society that whatever we do is justified, that we have the right to do whatever we want after the atrocities of the 7th of October, and that nobody can stop us. And until now, it worked for Israel. And as the Prime Minister said, it's not Israel in the blacklist, but the UN is in the blacklist. And I'm just asking, how many children did the UN kill and how many children did Israel kill?
And there's no better example of that, is there, Gideon, than today when we've got the Israeli army rescuing 4 captives from inside Gaza, in the process killing more than 150 people. That number is rising rapidly. And yet in Israel, we're just seeing celebrations, Netanyahu going to meet them in hospital. Are you concerned that this news is going to drown out the news about the blacklist?
It did already. First of all, the news about the blacklist are always more spread abroad than in Israel. The media in the service of the occupation and in the service of the war, voluntarily so, does do anything possible to make the Israelis feel good about themselves and not to bother them with all kind of unpleasant news. So for sure, Israel will now addict itself to the release of the 4 hostages, which is by itself a great day and a very happy day for the families, for each Israeli. But still, there are some others, but Israel does not see the others.
Damien, Netanyahu said earlier today that this decision, well, he said that no delusional UN decision will change the fact that the Israeli army is the most moral in the world. As Gideon says, he calls it a sad joke. What's your response to that?
I mean, I think the thing to understand about this listing is it's a Security Council mandated mechanism. It's been set up. There are strict rules and procedures about how it should be implemented. In that sense, it treats all potential people who have been listed fairly. It's also important to remember that both Hamas and Islamic Jihad are probably being listed as well. So it's not as if it's targeted at just one party or the other. And there are clear procedures for having done this. So to say that it is being done in some sort of arbitrary way is delusional. And I think, going back to, as you've said in the footage before, this is not the first time there's been attempts to list Israel. In 2015, Israel was on the list, and then there was pressure put on the UN to remove it, and eventually didn't make the final cut of the report. So this has been a long time coming, and I think it's welcome. It is symbolic, but it will have additional pressure and put Israel increasingly isolated. So in that sense, I think it's extremely welcome.
You say there was pressure before to keep Israel off the list. Do you think that pressure existed this time around? And what form did it take, Damien?
So last time when I was involved, I was the head of protection for UNRWA. So we were one of the agencies which were contributing to information that is used in this mechanism. There are 6 gross violations against children that perpetrators can potentially get listed. And in 2015, I think it was 700 children that were killed. Many UNRWA schools were attacked. And for these reasons, Israel was put on the list. And at the last minute, there was pressure that was put on by the US government and others to take off the list. I think this time around, it would have been, extraordinary that anyone would have the audacity to try and put pressure in this way. No doubt there probably was. But given that more children are being killed in Gaza since this latest round of conflict than all the other countries covered by this report, I think this speaks volumes to why there's such a compelling case for it to be listed this time around. So, no doubt there probably was pressure, but I think no one would think that it would be justified for them not being included. If they hadn't been included, it would have lost the whole credibility of the mechanism.
Gideon, it's interesting to ask why the Israeli ambassador Gilad Erdan leaked and posted this UN decision before it was announced.
Look, from day one, this ambassador is aiming not at the international community and not at the UN, only in the Central Committee of his party back home, to his political basis. He's a politician who thinks about his next job, nothing but this. And they would like it. They would like it when he will do all those really ridiculous tricks, which really embarrass me as an Israeli and shame me as an Israeli. But that's the man, and he is leaving soon, thanks God.
Oh, there seems to be no indication from Israel that it's going to accept being put on this list. Even today, amid the celebrations of the release of the captives, there's no mention of the cost to the Palestinians. More than 150 lives taken to release these 4 people. You were in Gaza just last month. Can you give us examples of what it's like to be there in the course of this war, especially as a child?
It's almost impossible without having been there, because you think that you understand what it might be like when you're on the outside. And then you get in there and you realize that we quite simply lack the vocabulary to be able to adequately express this. It is such a crush of people that right now, after the invasion in Rafah, has been shoved into an even smaller, denser space. You go through the tent encampments in an area like Mawasi, for example, and every step you take inside anyone's tent sends up a cloud of flies. Mothers are holding, limp and listless babies, trying to shove them towards you. Children are swarming around begging for food. And that's not to mention those that you end up coming across in hospitals, where it's bed after bed of children that have been amputated. And I was just in Cairo right now visiting some of the injured children that my charity INARA is working with. There was a boy whose leg had been amputated. There was another 7-year-old boy who was paralyzed from the waist down because shrapnel was lodged in his spine, and he quite simply didn't speak anymore. And his mother was saying that, he used to be very chatty. He loved running around. I met, another child also that spoke of this horrific story that had happened to him, talking about how, an explosion happened and the bottom part of the leg came off, and then just crawling, trying to find help. It's impossible to find a child right now that is not carrying some sort of extraordinarily deep trauma. And we also have to keep in mind that this isn't the sort of, war zone where something traumatic happens, a bomb goes off or a firefight erupts in your neighborhood, and then at some point in time it ends and there's an ability to flee to safe space. That doesn't exist. And children speak in rhetoric right now that no child should ever be using. And children are highly aware of the fact that their childhood has been taken from them, their safety has been taken from them, and their future right now, if this doesn't really start shifting in direction, is being taken from them as well.
Gideon, it's impossible not to have an emotional reaction as you listen to Arwa and hear the stories of those children suffering in Gaza. To what extent do Israelis hear those stories?
Laura, what can I tell you? I'm really speechless when I talk to my fellow Israelis. There is no room for any empathy to the Palestinians ever since the 7th of October. All Gaza are terrorists. You cannot penetrate this. I try in many ways, and it's a total failure. It's not only the right-wingers, don't be wrong. It's the entire society of Israel, with some exceptions, obviously, but very few, who cannot see the people of Gaza as human beings and cannot even see the children of Gaza as human beings. It's part of their revenge, of the punishment of Gaza, of the revenge that Israel has to put on Gaza and Gaza, not Hamas, because those children have nothing to do with what's going on. You mentioned now 150 people killed today. For Israel, any price is legitimate, any price. Gaza can pay any price, and the Israelis will not shock by anything and will not feel any empathy. And by the way, it's also almost forbidden by law to show any empathy. Israeli Palestinians, Israeli citizens who try to pay some kind of empathy and pity over Gaza in the social media were taken to investigation, and in a few cases were taken to jail or were fired from their works, including academics.
Damien, if the children of Gaza are not seen as human beings, when we see the type of massacres today where more than 150 people were killed, including children, as this war continues, as the Israeli army closes in on the Hamas leaders and the remaining captives, of which there are 120, do you see the killing intensifying, blacklist or no blacklist?
Well, I think we all hope that we want to see a ceasefire and end to the fighting as soon as possible. And I think it's really difficult. And hearing the other two speak now, I think it's difficult to, keep hope for an end to this, and to hope that one day there will be accountability. And this list, although it might seem quite a minor development, it might be seen as events quickly overtake, it is another mechanism for accountability. We've seen the process with the International Court of Justice. We've seen the process of the ICC. This is another accountability mechanism, and it does put pressure on the Israeli authorities. And I think, in time to come, it provides the kind of information that hopefully there will be justice. One thing I think important to, be mindful of this list is your name remains on the list until you take demonstrated action to address the concerns that are being raised. And there's probably no intention of the Israeli government engaging in dialogue with this mechanism to take the kind of measures to remove it, or at least the government of the day. But the name of the IDF will remain on the list until that happens. And so this will endure. It will come back as a news item. In that sense, it will continue to put pressure. So in that sense, I think it is an important development.
Justice in time to come, Arwa, but of course that's going to be too late for the children that you've been talking to, all the children of Gaza. You've also been speaking to children who've managed to escape, the people in Cairo, for example. Can you now give us an idea of not just the immediate impacts of this war, but the long-term consequences of this war, for whom maybe justice in the future for Israel might have some positive impact?
Yeah, when you talk to children right now, the thing is the trauma is still ongoing, even for those who have managed to flee, because more often than not, they're fleeing with one guardian and maybe, if they're lucky, a couple of their other siblings. But we're talking about families that are entirely split apart. So an example is, one family who I met where the mother is out with her injured son, two younger siblings, but then her husband and her two other older children are still stuck in Gaza. And she's torn between, on the one hand, does she pray that her son who's out of Gaza for treatment is going to be able to walk again? Or does she pray for the safety and security of her children and family members who are still inside? Children who are calling her every single day saying, "Mommy, why did you leave us? And Mommy, when are we going to see you again?" And how does she ever even begin to explain that to them or even to herself? I have met a number of children who quite literally lost their capacity to speak. We have to remember that, children don't have the sort of vocabulary to be able to articulate what they're going through. Although that being said, the vast majority of adults are highly incapable of articulating the depth and breadth and scope of, sort of the horror and the psychological obliteration that this has caused them individually as well. And when we're talking about interventions at this stage for children, because the trauma is still ongoing, because the triggers are daily, there really isn't a lot of work that can be done right now. Of course, the great risk is that these sorts of traumas then calcify within an individual, especially within a child, and can be severely debilitating as the child is trying to grow and mature and become an active member of society.
Gideon, as Israel is further isolated on the global stage with its inclusion on this list, the first democratic country to do so, it sits alongside authoritarian regimes and listed terrorist groups. How, however, has it united people within Israel? We know that the government is highly fractious. There are people threatening to leave Netanyahu's coalition. We've got Benny Gantz was expected to announce his resignation today. Do you think, however, that this outside action only serves to bring the Israeli leaders together?
First of all, the 7th of October brought the Israelis together. And from then on, we have only one opinion, not that there are no political political arguments. There are many, and there are demonstrations. But pay attention to what are they demonstrating for. They are demonstrating only against Netanyahu, the demon that only if we'll get rid of him, Israel will turn back to become a paradise, which is not true, and for releasing the hostages, which is by itself a real holy goal, but nothing about the war, nothing about the crimes of the war. There is a wall-to-wall agreement in Israeli society that Israel has the right to do whatever it did in the last 8 months. And this we have to take as a fact. That's the truth. And it's a very, very depressing truth, not only about the Palestinians, also about the nature of Israeli society.
Damien, you talk about this list potentially holding Israel to account in the future. In the more immediate future, though, we've got the Secretary-General Antonio Guterres sending the list to the United Nations Security Council. They will then decide whether or not to take action. With the US veto, will anything happen there?
So the way that the listing works is the Secretary General's report with the list of armed actors and national forces that are being proposed to be listed by the Secretary General. It'll be debated in an open debate. All members will therefore comment on that. Israel will be requested, if it so chooses, to defend its position in this case. And so that would be the most immediate step next as to what happens to the list. Now, whether this gets taken up by the Security Council itself, the Security Council has obviously shown itself not to have been able to take any specific action on Gaza, but it does add the many calls, I think, within it to take more robust action and the kinds of steps that it could take. So in that sense, it contributes to put more pressure on the different members of the Security Council to take action.
Arwa, to what extent do Palestinians within Gaza and indeed the occupied West Bank around the world, to what extent they recognise that there are global efforts to isolate Israel and hold it accountable for the war crimes and the actions inside Gaza. Do they recognise it, or do they feel abandoned?
You know, I think on the one hand, they do realize that perhaps the dynamic is different right now. And that is largely due to the fact that, Gaza's story is not just being told through the lens of the Western media. And the Western media is quite frankly not permitted into Gaza by Israel, but mostly through the lens of Gazans themselves. But there is a sense, yes, of abandonment. There is a gross sense that everybody could be doing a lot more, because despite the fact that there is a recognition that there is, a greater, broader and bigger movement right now, it's quite difficult for anyone who is inside Gaza right now to comprehend how it is that all of these entities, other than pretty much, the US, a number of Western countries, and Israel itself, how it is that the rest of the world is incapable to bring about an end to what is happening to them. Because beyond the bombs, beyond the destruction, just the sheer fact that there is not a greater effort to try to somehow get more humanitarian aid inside, medical supplies inside, baby diapers inside, despite the fact that there are these atrocious, horrific numbers when it comes to the dead and the injured. You also have the spread of cholera, you have the spread of hepatitis A, you have the spread of communicable diseases. I mean, it is impossible for anyone inside Gaza or even in the West Bank to understand how it is that there can be, such a desire for this to end, and yet such an inability to actually not even end it, but just in the slightest begin to ease it.
Well, on that note, we will end our discussion. Arwa Damon, many thanks indeed for joining us, along with Damien Lilly and Gideon Levy. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. For further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.